with everybody else on that. But it is kind of an opportunity, I believe, for college baseball. And I don't mind telling you, I'm a little late to the party on this, probably within the last 5 years or so. I think I've come to realize just how special a sport college baseball can be. Those weekend series in the SEC, I think, are a real blast. And so I think that as we go through the month of April, likely with no Major League Baseball here, as we go through the month of April, I think it's going to give a lot of folks who maybe have not fully appreciated it. Because when you live in the Atlanta area, and we'll do this very quickly and we'll get ready to get started. When you live in the Atlanta area, so much of what happens to us is going to exist around professional sports. Like the Braves, the Falcons, the Hawks. They just suck a lot of the oxygen out of the sports conversation, whereas Georgia football is going to stand right there with anything, and it's probably the single biggest sporting entity in our state. But in the Atlanta area, it is a pro sports town, so a lot of attention gets paid to the professional sports. And therefore, there's probably less attention paid to, like, say, Georgia basketball, Georgia baseball, the women's sports. There's probably less attention paid to those in our market than are paid to LSU baseball or South Carolina women's basketball or Mississippi State, whatever else. That in smaller markets, more far removed from professional sports, the other teams just get more attention. That's not a good thing or a bad thing. It's just kind of how life is that the sporting bandwidth for local television and, traditional media, things like that, just kind of gravitates more towards Braves, Falcons, Hawks. And so therefore some of the what you might think of as non-revenue UGA sports just don't get as much attention as their SEC brethren do because of kind of the market in which they live. Well, that's not going to be a little bit different this year. There's not going to be Braves to cover. And so maybe that gives the Diamond Dogs a little extra attention they otherwise would get. William Perry checking in. Tennille checking in here there as well. Matt Rukavina, of course, on board there too. Thomas T-Bone 86 says, when does March Madness start? Are you ready? Well, I certainly don't expect UGA to be a very big part of that, but we are ready for that. In fact, then we have a fun March Madness themed type of, we'll call it an event, but it's not going to be a live event necessarily, but it's going to be some fun stuff we have coming up very soon. Can't wait to tell you about that. And listen, I am a big fan of the tournament, and last night was the final Tuesday of the regular season, so we're starting to get towards SEC tournament and NCAA tournament coming up after that. We're starting to get there. So, yeah, for sure on all of that. Matt Rukavina also on the subject of Tom Crean. And last night, Georgia dropped another game to Tennessee. This one actually pretty entertaining. The Okenda dunk was unreal, just unreal. He's pretty impressive dude all the way around. I'd love to see him maybe come back to UGA if at all possible, but it certainly seems like Tom Crean is probably not. And listen, everything I can surmise, Crean seems to be a pretty good guy, but it's not working out right now at Georgia. I think privately he'd probably be the first to admit that. It's just kind of not working out, and sometimes that's the case. And boy, not really quite so sure where Georgia's going from here. At one point in time, I probably would have been keenly aware of who the hot names were in terms of a coach that Georgia could hire. At this stage of my life, I'm probably not quite as plugged in on that as I used to be. I am looking forward to hearing what others say about that, though. I'm looking forward to seeing what the hot list turns out to be, the list of names worth considering. Obviously, think about a former guy like Jonas Hayes maybe being a part of that, or any number of names that you might consider there. But it seems like that's about to be a very relevant conversation there around UGA. That's just how it is. All right, good stuff here. Are we on the other platforms now? All right, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch. Welcome in live to us on video today. Mike Griffith coming by from the NFL Scouting Combine. Also, maybe a surprise or two from that before we're done. But to take a moment here to welcome in big-time brand new sponsor to our fold. Always a very special day when we have a chance to welcome in someone else to the DawgNation Daily family. And today it's a very special one indeed because Breda Pest Management has been doing big things around our state for a long time, Atlanta area, across the state. The official pest management company of UGA Athletics, taking care of business at Foley Field and the Equestrian Complex, Sanford Stadium there as well. This is a company with deep connections to UGA. Good friends of ours in kind of an unofficial capacity around here at DawgNation Daily for a long time, and now a big part of what we're doing on the program. I'm so excited about telling their story and so happy to be sharing their message as we get ready to begin today. It is fun to say it. DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Breda Pest Management, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
So when we can be entertaining around here, we want to be able to do that, and sometimes that means giving you a little bit of a laugh. Now, some of the things that cause us to laugh in life are not always jokes. They're just the kind of things that are almost unintentionally funny. Maybe an example of that off the top of the program here today. Now, we'll get Mike Griffith coming up later on for the NFL Scouting Combine. That'll be good. We'll take a look at the Georgia guys there getting ready to do some big things and make a name for themselves in the NFL Draft. We'll also take a closer look at a story we probably haven't given enough attention to already this week, so we'll do all that coming up. Before that, though, let me give you this just for fun. There's a guy named Matt Hayes, longtime writer with the Sporting News, now working for Saturday Down South, and he has a very interesting column up at Saturday Down South right now. Now, listen, generally speaking, I kind of like Hayes. I feel like he's got some provocative opinions, and he's almost like the old school guy, and I still appreciate this. Like kind of like the old school columnist who kind of throws out a hot take and then spends some time trying to back up his take with whatever it is that he writes. Honestly, like I think there's still a place for that, and I don't mind that. But when we see something that we think is kind of ridiculous, we're going to kind of do our part to kind of point that out to you. So here's what he says at Saturday Down South here at the beginning of the week. He says, this is the headline: "Laugh all you want, but Tennessee is the next elite SEC East beast." Oh, my goodness. Another beast in the SEC East and elite in Tennessee being used in the same sentence here by a longtime veteran writer, Matt Hayes. I find this to be a little bit silly. I think some of you probably will there as well. In fact, let me kind of dig a little deeper here and show you what Hayes says in the story about all of this. He says, once again, to kind of, play on the theme of humor, he says the concept was laughable nearly 2 seasons ago, but it can no longer be denied. Tennessee is a threat again in the SEC because the Vols will have one of the 2 best offenses in the conference, he says. Now, I mean, listen, I don't mind telling you the Tennessee offense is pretty good here, and I don't mind telling you that during the season we had some respect for that ourselves. I find, though, the way in which Hayes pushes this point to be a little exaggerated, and I find this to be the kind of thing that we see this happen each and every year. And listen, to the extent that there is any anti-Georgia bias out there, I honestly do not believe it exists because anyone doesn't like UGA or doesn't like Kirby Smart or doesn't like whatever else. I don't believe that to be true, and I've told you this before. That the kind of anti-UGA bias that Georgia potentially suffers from is related to just the nature of the same old, just feels very boring to people who are tasked with writing off-season columns. Now, it's not boring to us because it's our team, and, it's fun to come on here and talk over and over again about how Georgia's going to win everything because that's what we want to see happen. But if you're writing for Saturday Down South, that is not what you want to see happen. Not because you hate Georgia, but just because you want something new. And so in February, moving into March, there is always going to be that desire to see if you can pump up something else. Hey, Tennessee, offense, Hendon Hooker coming back. Don't worry about the defense and don't worry about whatever else, but just focus on how sexy and exciting that offense is, and let that be enough to say that this is a threat. This is the next elite SEC East beast. How many times do we see this kind of same thing pushed with Florida, or a couple of years ago it was also pushed with Tennessee, except it was like Jeremy Pruitt during pandemic level recruiting, that there's always just this wish, this hope that maybe something's going to happen to make it a little less boring. Georgia not just being a rubber stamp in the SEC East, or Alabama a rubber stamp in the SEC West, or the SEC champion, or rubber stamp in the playoff, or whatever else. There's just always this hope that maybe something prevents this from being the same old, and Matt Hayes, kind of the latest here, when it comes to all that, kind of hoping that Tennessee can kind of up in the expected outcome, which is Georgia once again dominating this division. In fact, the gap between Georgia and the rest of this division right now on paper seems to be about as wide as it has been in quite some time, because you can talk up Tennessee if you want to, but the one thing that Tennessee probably won't be this year that Florida was in a couple of the previous years, kind of a preseason top 10 level team. That's a team that actually beat Georgia in 2020 and, was kind of top 10 level, 18, 19, 20. right now Tennessee doesn't actually start this upcoming year with nearly as much steam as Florida would have had in some of those previous years. So if anything, with Florida's now demise with a brand new coach in Billy Napier, the gap between Georgia and much of the rest of the division is now wider than it has been. So much so that Florida's not the team that you hype up anymore as a hopeful threat to UGA. Now you got to turn your attention north to Knoxville and saying, well, maybe it's Tennessee that can be what was it called before? The elite? The beast, the SEC East, ready to be a threat to UGA. Now, in fairness, what happened for Josh Heupel year one there with the Vols did get some positive attention, and frankly, we even here on this show we thought that that Heupel did a pretty good job, better than we would have assumed given the roster holes that he had. He was honored recently as one of the Football Writers Association of America first-year coaches. He and Shane Beamer shared that award. If you want to go back to that awards ceremony, this is going back to the end of last year. Heupel did, talk about the challenge that he faced and the obstacles that he overcame to have a successful first year at Tennessee last season. And even if we laugh at Tennessee competing and threatening Georgia here this year, we don't laugh at the idea that the Tennessee probably was better a year ago than we ever gave them credit for. And we don't mind admitting it when we got a little bit wrong. And on Tennessee last year, we probably did. This is Heupel taking the victory lap on what he accomplished in his first season.
And coming to Tennessee, obviously there was a lot of outside noise. We were able to quiet the storm, quiet the chatter. Our kids bought in immediately into what we're doing. They understood that the connection and accountability were going to be extremely important in the success that we were going to have. We never placed a ceiling in what our players inside of the program could do. We believed that there were great players inside of it. They bought into it, and they worked extremely hard. And as well as we played at times last year, we were disappointed when the outcome wasn't what we wanted because we knew we had enough to go win on those days. Excited about the future, what we've been able to do in year one, but what we're able to build upon here as we get started in year two when our kids get back to campus.
Yeah, so listen, I think everything that Heupel says there is correct. I think the Football Writers Association of America was correct in honoring Heupel for what he did year one. There is no doubt that he's in the process of, I think, producing a turnaround there for Tennessee. But the idea that the turnaround is going to happen so quick that the Vols could threaten UGA in the SEC East this year, or as Matt Hayes goes on to say in this story at SaturdayDownSouth.com, actually topple Georgia and then play Alabama in the SEC title game, that is just kind of wishful thinking of a media who always wants to accelerate stories faster than they can actually reasonably be thought to occur. And this whole notion that this whole thing can be led by offense, you've heard me say this over and over again. Yes, the Tennessee offense is good, but the idea that it doesn't matter how good they are on defense and the fact that you excuse away bad defensive performances because the offense is so good, that's just a misunderstanding of football. In this particular story, Hayes says the Vols have the best quarterback, not named Bryce Young. They've already got a dangerous offense poised to boom in year two under Heupel. And as we've seen late in college football, those who score points in bunches are those that win games that matter. He says LSU overwhelmed Alabama in 2019 with an offense so devastating it simply had to outscore Alabama. But here's the problem, though. While that is potentially active fodder for a column in which you're arguing for an offensive-minded football team having success, the actual truth is, we've highlighted this over and over again, that the Alabama offense was also great in 2019 there as well. In fact, if you go back and watch the LSU-Alabama showdown in Tuscaloosa that year, they're both scoring in bunches. But ultimately for Alabama, who had been the favored expected winner coming into the season, the reason why they didn't is they gave up 40-plus points twice. In both their regular season losses, their defense didn't show up at all. This idea, well, it just goes to prove that defense doesn't matter. No, I think what it proves is for a great offense like Alabama that season, not having any defense open the door for somebody else to overtake them. In the case of LSU, that's exactly what they did, because by the end of that season, and you'll remember this, the emergence of Derek Stingley and others, while LSU was never a great defense, they were a better defense than Alabama was. It was the combination of that complementary football that gave LSU a chance to overtake Alabama, that the people who want to diminish the role of defense in the conversation at all are making a grave mistake, and we've said that over and over again. But beyond that, just to keep it to Georgia and Tennessee here for a moment, here is one of the reasons why I'm comfortable telling you that it's okay to laugh at Matt Hayes suggesting that Tennessee is going to be the kind of team that sneaks up on UGA. Here's why I don't believe that's true. Because we know that for the most part, nobody really sneaks up on UGA. In fact, this Tennessee team in 2021, who was kind of on the way to being a little bit of a surprise team and on the way to being the kind of team that was getting some attention. Even that team wasn't really able to sneak up on Georgia last season. Late in the year, Georgia kind of already wrapped up the SEC East, but going into that game, Kirby Smart already knew that Josh Heupel was doing some pretty good things and made a point to make sure his team was aware of that there as well going into that game. Here's a reminder from last November.
Maybe focusing on Tennessee. Playing in a really tough environment, one of the toughest places to play in the country. Their fan base is bought in, all in on Coach Heupel and his staff. It will be a tremendous atmosphere and opportunity in which so many other conferences don't have teams that maybe aren't in the hunt for, maybe an SEC championship that have that much passion that they're going to sell it out and be really loud. It will be a great atmosphere, and our players will need to prepare for it. We will need to prepare our players for it. It's going to be a really tough physical game. They've got a really good football team. I've been able to watch them play, several weeks that we've either been off or we had this early game, and you get to see them at night. And they've actually played a lot better than some of their scores indicate. And I've got a lot of respect for their team and how hard they play.
So the point here is, if Tennessee couldn't sneak up on Georgia last year, and they couldn't, by the way, Georgia dominated the football game. What's the final score? 41-17? 41-17. If Tennessee couldn't sneak up on Georgia last year, they are definitely not going to sneak up on Georgia this year with an offseason's worth of hype where guys like Matt Hayes are saying, hey, watch out for Tennessee, the new beast in the SEC East. That's just not going to happen. In fact, I would say that one of the more impressive things that Georgia did all last season was going into a hostile environment, taking Tennessee's best shot at the beginning of that game, and emerging as the easy winner. It was one of the things that kind of led me to believe that, hey, you know what, maybe Georgia really can win this year's national championship. In fact, with a little bit of context on that, let me let you hear how happy Kirby Smart was when it was all said and done versus the Vols last season, once again from November.
I can't say enough about the leaders on this team. After that game against Missouri, to have three guys stand up in the locker room and I don't know what we won, 40-6 or what, I don't even know what the score was, but they said that it wasn't acceptable the way we approached the game, the way we handled the game. And I knew right then that we were going to be okay this week. Now, I still worried a lot, but those guys said everybody better be in there to lift, everybody better be on time. And it just took over the team, and it permeated through them all week. And I thought Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we had really good practices. Tough place to play. I think the way the game started, they start that way on a lot of people. And we talked to our guys about taking their best shot. But we didn't come up here to take shots. We came up here to throw them. And our offense came right back with a huge drive, which I thought was huge for us to start that way. It gives the defense some confidence and let us get our feet underneath us. Kind of did a tremendous job, and proud of the way the guys played.
We didn't come up here to take a shot. We came up here to throw a shot. That's what Kirby Smart said last November. I mean, honestly, do you think he's going to get caught off guard by Tennessee in 2022 when in 2021 they're going up there in Knoxville looking to throw shots, looking to be the aggressor, looking to take Tennessee seriously even back then? I think this is one of those things where Georgia fans should feel pretty comfortable laughing about this. Yeah, Tennessee's probably getting better, but the kind of better you have to get to be on Georgia's radar as a true threat to beat the Dogs, I'd suggest the Vols are still a long way away from that. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. So happy to tell you that for the first time here today, I'm happy to say that we are presented to you by our friends at Breda Pest Management. They've been doing it around the Atlanta area since 1975, and they are also the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics there as well. That means they're taking care of Foley Field and the equestrian complex, also Sanford Stadium there as well. And if they're doing that for the home of the Dogs, what can they do for your home there as well? Because they take care of you when it comes to bugs and critters. Now listen, there are a lot of companies that may do the one or not the other, but Breda Pest Management does both of those for you. And if you're a homeowner in the Atlanta area and across the state of Georgia, so many of our folks are, it's important to keep this in mind because, think about the field there in Athens for a second. It's a 100-yard football field. Well, in a space that size, you're talking about the possibility of over 1 million termites. These are like silent destroyers of your home, right? So you have to have a pest management company that you trust to keep your home safe, to keep you protected, much the same way they've been protecting Sanford Stadium and the home where Georgia plays all the time. They can do the same thing for you, and they've been doing that since 1975 there as well. They are the pest service that we trust here at Dog Nation. We want you to be able to trust them there as well. Easy to get started with them. As we get started with them on our show today, you can get started with them there as well as your pest management service. Just simply visit them online at bredapest.com. Now, if you're listening to me radio podcast, understand how this is spelled. It's B-R-E-D-A. B-R-E-D-A. That's bredapest.com. Happy to have Breda Pest Management as a part of Dog Nation Daily here today. Big friend of ours. Matt and the entire team over there have been. We've seen him at football games, hung out with him at tailgates. These are big dog people, big football fans, and they've also been dedicated to the service when it comes to pest management for a long time, both for UGA and for UGA fans all across our great state, and now part of Dog Nation Daily there as well. All right, let me take care of a little bit of business here. So Mike Griffith is in Indianapolis. I told him we'd try to get to him a little bit earlier. So Michael Carville, our producer, if you don't mind, let's postpone Around the Doghouse for right now. We're going to do some stuff on Fran Brown on that. Let's postpone that for right now because I want to try to take care of Mike here, who I told him we'd try to get to him a little early in the show. So we'll do some more stuff here in a moment on Fran Brown, the new defensive backs coach at UGA. This is a guy that probably deserves more attention than we've given him thus far this week. We've just been so preoccupied with the Stacey Searles news, and there are a lot of reasons why the Searles thing probably kind of leaps to the forefront of the conversation, among the rest, the fact that it happened more recently. But now that we've given due attention to Searles as the replacement for Matt Luke, somewhat surprising news that Luke was moving on, going back to last week, it's also important to look at the other assistant coach that UGA just hired. And so as a part of Around the Doghouse in a little bit, we'll look at Fran Brown a little more closely. In fact, some recent things that Brown has said about his own biography that he himself finds important that I think help tell us about why he's potentially a big-time ad there for UGA. So we'll do that coming up later on. But for now, from Indianapolis, a lot of dogs trying to make a name for themselves this week. Also recapping a lot of busy news for UGA as of late. Let's do that all with Mike Griffith here today as part of Dog Nation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We'll say hello to Mike Griffith here and get some thoughts from him on what's happening in there in Indianapolis here coming up in a couple of minutes. Before that, though, Mike, let me do a couple of things here on some of these new coaches just hired at UGA. And as I said before, over the course of our time today, we're going to try to give a little more attention to the Fran Brown thing because we probably haven't done enough of that as of yet. Let's go back in time here for a moment. What do you think of UGA adding Brown there as cornerbacks coach, working in tandem now with Will Muschamp, and kind of what this means for UGA, the addition coming here from Rutgers? What do you think about that?
I heard good things about him, BA. I've talked to some parents, players that were recruited by Fran Brown about how he plays, about how he develops talent in the NFL. A lot of guys from Rutgers have gone on and had some success there. So, I mean, that's a big hire. You want to get a guy that's a great developer of talent, a guy that can work really well, with the staff and be a good fit, right? You also want to make sure the guy's a good fit for the staff. So, it seems like a really strong hire for Kirby Smart, a veteran guy. I think one of the better hires Kirby made.
And, a guy that spent some time around, like, say, Matt Rule, or spent some time around Greg Schiano. Now, you can say what you want about Schiano, I guess, but this is a guy who's kind of been kind of an up-and-comer in the coaching ranks, working with, and then Rule's case, a guy that's gone on to be an NFL head coach. So certainly it's a pedigree and training kind of outside the SEC footprint, but he's also worked with a lot of respected coaches.
Yeah, I mean, football's football. I mean, guys, the SEC is the best conference, the preeminent conference, but there's other good coaches from other leagues out there and other good developers of talent. It's, no real trade secrets, but it's how guys can connect with the players and motivate the players. And, everything I've heard about Fran Brown is, he's a veteran. I think the bigger question is really more about on the Georgia side of it, BA. I mean, this is the fourth DB coach for Kirby Smart in 5 years. And, can Kirby give these guys a little room to work? We heard that, Jamal Dye had, wanted to teach some things a different way maybe. And, Kirby's very stringent in how he wants to do things. And, as we all know, everybody works in different environments. You kind of got to let people do their jobs. And I think this is big for Kirby, though, to show that, now that he's got a proven veteran back there, that he can keep this guy around for a few years.
On the other side, Stacey Searles hired as offensive line coach. This is a guy that Georgia fans feel like they have some familiarity with, going back to his time here at UGA from 2007 to 2010. That's probably not a a brilliant era of offensive line play, to be fair, and long history, number of other schools there as well. And once again, probably some ups, some downs for Searles. This was not universally celebrated by UGA fans. There's some trepidation here. What do you think about the hire of Searles?
Well, I mean, Mark Richt hired him twice. Mac Brown hired him twice. Those are two Hall of Fame coaches. I think Mark Richt will end up in the Hall of Fame. Mac Brown is certainly a Hall of Fame coach. And, Mark Richt hired Kirby Smart, too. He's got a pretty good eye for talent. Brian McClendon's the guy that came back. And, I like the hire. I think it's a solid hire. I think for what Georgia wants to do on the offensive line, the way they want to run the ball. I mean, you say 2007 to 10 wasn't that great, but, boy, no Sean Marino sure looked good running the ball back there. I think Georgia could use a no Sean Marino performance out of Kenny McIntosh this year. Hopefully you'll see one. But a lot of talent there on the Georgia offensive line. And just being completely candid, just talking to different people again, I think Matt Luke did a good job. But I don't know that Matt Luke really ever raised up to the level of Sam Pittman, if we're going to be honest about it. And I think this is a chance for Georgia, not only to maintain, but, Searles has got a reputation of developing good lines that can lead leagues in rushing. 2 years in a row, North Carolina led the ACC in rushing. And say what you want, talent's relative there. But talking with Mark Richt about it earlier this week, Brandon, he said, the thing he liked about Stacey Searles' lines when he hired him away from Nick Saban at LSU originally was how physical and strong and tough Stacey Searles' players were. So I don't really understand the criticism on this one. I think it's confusing to me because I've heard Stacey Searles' name in the business for a long time. And, he's a veteran coach that a lot of people, think's pretty good.
Turning our attention to the NFL Combine here for a moment. You're in Indianapolis there. That's obviously a sign of some recent success for UGA and some former UGA players now. Also hope it works out well for them in terms of their chance to impress NFL draft scouts here this week. I guess starting with wide receiver George Pickens here today. Give me a little bit of a preview of what you expect to see while you're up there in Indy.
Wow, 14 Bulldogs over the next 3 days. Now, it's going to start out slow. George is the only Bulldog that's going today. Quarterback and receivers is the group. And just posted a story on John Mechie, and Georgia fans probably have a pretty good idea what's coming there. He was asked by an NFL reporter if the championship game would have been different if he was healthy or if Jameson Williams hadn't gone down. We're going to hear this the whole offseason, the whole what-if thing, right? I guess we heard it after 2017. Now Alabama's going to keep telling everybody they coulda, shoulda, woulda. Not a surprise. And it's going to take more than once. If there's one thing I'm picking up on, just being right, it's going to take more than once for the nation to be convinced that Georgia has really knocked Bama off that top rope. We'll find out. We'll find out over time. I'll tell you what, Georgia's on top here. 14 guys are going to be here. Now, that's a program record, and I think Georgia could have 14 or 15 guys drafted, Brandon. I mean, the school record's 9, and certainly most of these guys here are going to be drafted. So today, Pickens, a guy who wants to creep into the first round, needs to run a really good number, needs to interview well, and as we know, he really wasn't allowed to talk much at Georgia. Kirby kind of kept him behind the scenes. He didn't really let George Pickens ever talk. So I think there's a lot of anticipation to hear what George Pickens will have to say here today in Indianapolis. One of the things I've been asked a lot recently is kind of, who has the best chance from the UGA crew to kind of make a name for themselves, or what's maybe the most interesting. And I find myself, when I asked about this, kind of gravitating towards, defense front seven, maybe defensive line in particular, guys like Devontae Wyatt, guys like Trayvon Walker, who I think are going to be very attractive for these draft scouts. We've obviously paid a lot of attention to Jordan Davis already, but when you think about, and maybe this goes beyond the scouting combine, you start bringing in the UGA Pro Day and a lot of the pre-draft process too. Like, what are the big draft storylines that you're paying the most attention to for UGA as it kind of gets going today with George? Well, you mentioned Trayvon Walker and Jordan and Jacoby Dean and Devontae Wyatt. Could we see 4 Georgia players picked in the first round? That would be a program record, right? 2 years back, I think he had 3. Chubb was in that mix with Roquan Smith. I believe, or maybe it was Sony. There were 3 after the 2017 season. Right. Could we see a record 4 guys in the first? And Jordan Davis has actually slipped out of the first round in some predictions, Brandon. So I'm really interested to see how does Jordan show up here, show up and show out. What's he going to look like? How much is he going to weigh? Last time we saw him, he was over 340, and Kirby always wanted him. Kirby was always watching that weight. And I'll be real interested to see how he shows up and shows out here, and if he can get himself back in that first-round conversation. Of course, Nakobe, Trayvon, as you mentioned, Devontae, we know what they're going to do. I mentioned Pickens today. Can he slide into the first round? Maybe. James Cook is a guy that I think is intriguing. I think if James can run a really good number, maybe he can move up. He slid a little bit in the projections after skipping out on the Senior Bowl at the last minute. That wasn't, it wasn't a good thing. Right? So a lot of people want to see him here. They want to see what he can do. I think if he runs a good number, I think James Cook could enter the second round conversation because I think he's dynamic. And I think running backs, especially the versatile ones, I think they're making a little bit of a comeback because you're seeing just how much of a weapon they could be catching the ball in the backfield. And certainly his pedigree as Dalvin Cook's little brother does not hurt him in this NFL circle. So that's another guy I'm kind of – Channing Tindall, just kind of flying under the radar a little bit. We remember those pursuit angles and just how he flashed at times this year. Could he be a guy that could be a sneaky pick, a guy that's, silently creeping up in the NFL draft? Quay Walker, is he healthy? Quay pulled out of the Senior Bowl with injury. Is he healthy enough to work out here? And if so, how will he work out and how will he turn out? Of course, the offensive lineman, a couple of Sam Pittman recruits there with Justin Schaefer and Jamari Salyer. Big Ben Cleveland went a little bit earlier last year than a lot of people thought. So, Georgia offensive lineman pretty well thought of. Haven't heard a lot of buzz for Jamari and Justin Schaefer, but obviously they'll have an opportunity here to make some noise.
Mike, good stuff. I know you're there in Indianapolis. We may even have a surprise or two from you before we're done on the show today, which would be kind of cool. So we will let you continue to cover that for us here at Dog Nation. We'll look forward to speaking to you soon, very soon as well, on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management here today.
Appreciate it, Pierre.
Good stuff there from Mike Griffith. Here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today in Indianapolis, following all of that big day coming up for George Pickens. We'll certainly be watching all that closely. Let me kind of transition back to what I was going to do. We kind of went out of order a little bit because I wanted to try to get Mike early in the show today to give him a chance to do everything up there in Indianapolis that he needs to do. And it is kind of cool, by the way, to think of Georgia being back, or at least a lot of these Georgia guys being back in Indianapolis, a site that'll – I don't know that I've ever really spent a whole lot of time in my life thinking about Indianapolis prior to this past January, but now I guess I'll probably think about it fondly almost every day for the rest of my life, including now with those guys back up there at Lucas Oil Stadium again. So we wish them well as they get ready to move on with that here this week. And around the doghouse here for a moment, looking at the hiring of Fran Brown. You heard Mike Griffith sharing some of his thoughts about that a moment ago. Coming in here as a cornerbacks coach, obviously Will Muschamp focusing in on those safeties. This, in a lot of ways, I think is reflective of the change that's been ongoing with college football in general. That, listen, almost every single play now, more often than not, you're playing, nickel coverage, 5 defensive backs that, about half of your defense is now made up of defensive backs. So the idea that you'd have one assistant coach responsible for that many players when Georgia's rotating, not as much at safety, but at cornerback, Georgia's rotating a pretty good bit. You're playing a good number of defensive backs, and you have a good number of your 11 guys on the field who kind of technically qualify as defensive backs. So having a coaching situation and kind of a recruiting assignment that reflects just the large number of defensive backs you play, that probably makes some sense. And in the case of Brown, he kind of comes in as kind of an interesting outlier. Georgia has hired a lot of guys over the course of this offseason who do have previous ties to the program, or in a lot of respects, you look at the totality of the assistant coaches that Georgia has. A lot of those guys hail from the state of Georgia. Brown is a guy who has a little bit of a different pedigree on all of that. I went back and kind of looked at his time there at Rutgers, and I found some comments from him where he was talking about kind of how he got into coaching and kind of what matters to him, and in his own words, pointing out a couple of interesting biographical points that I think helped sell him to the Rutgers family there when he was defensive backs coach under Greg Schiano, and now also I think remain pretty relevant here for UGA there as well. So let me let you hear Brown here, the new cornerbacks coach at Georgia, in his own words, going back to his time in Piscataway with the Scarlet Knights.
How you doing? I'm Fran Brown. I'm the secondary coach here at Rutgers University. At Rose, head football coach of the Carolina Panthers, he recruited me, played for him. He said, Fran, I want you to get involved in football. And I was like, you think I could do it? He said, yeah, you should have been doing it. I think the moon and the stars all matched up the right way. That's my state. That's where I'm from. When you're from a state and you get to coach for the biggest program in the state, Coach Schiano, he just wants to win. But he doesn't just want to win at football. He wants the players that he's coaching to win at life, to win going to class, to win doing things. And he's wanting to do that with the coaches also. So that means a lot to me. It means a lot, and I have a lot to uphold of having the opportunity of coaching.
So there are a couple of things from a biographical standpoint I kind of want to point out there for a moment. First of all, the name you hear Brown mentioned in the beginning is Matt Rule, saying that Rule had recruited him as a player, and then at the end of his career says, hey, we think you need to be a coach. You need to get involved. You need to get involved in coaching. And I'll say the same thing about this that I said when Georgia hired its new outside linebackers coach. One of the things that I notice about guys who I don't know very well, and in the case of, Uza Duribe, I didn't really know him very well, and in the case of, Fran Brown, probably did not know very much about him before he was hired. One of the things that I do notice is that fast risers are going to get my attention. In other words, Matt Rule is a guy, now you can say, well, his time at Carolina has been somewhat shaky or whatever else, but there is no one who's going to say that Matt Rule doesn't know football, that if somehow Rule were to be out of a job there in Carolina, he'd have any choice of college head coaching jobs he wants to take again or maybe stay in the NFL, whatever else, that Matt Rule is clearly a very respected football coach. So a guy who's a respected football coach identifying in Brown the kind of thing that said, hey, I think you need to be a coach. I think you need to get involved in football. And much the same way, Les Miles, you can say what you want to about him, identifying Uza Duribe as a guy who I want to make an on-field coach here pretty quick because I recognize those personality traits, those credentials that are just innate in him to make him be that way. Apparently, Fran Brown had some of that also got the attention of a guy like Matt Rule, who I think we would all say we have respect for as a football coach. And then beyond that, here's the other thing about Brown that kind of jumps out at me. Now, in this video, obviously, speaking on behalf of the State University of New Jersey, talking about his New Jersey ties, there's a little bit of kind of that's what you're supposed to say in a situation like that. But let's take that seriously for a moment. That Fran Brown says, hey, I'm a New Jersey guy. I'm a New Jersey guy. I don't know if that's such a bad thing for UGA. And listen, I think those of us who are like, true SEC homers, and I've never apologized for being one of those guys. I clearly, think that the brand of football played down here in the Deep South is far better than the version played almost anywhere else. That we have a tendency to sort of write off anything north of the Mason-Dixon line is not worthy of our attention, and for the most part, that's true. The state of New Jersey, though, is one of those that's a little bit of an outlier there. Just as a quick comparison here for a moment. That if you look at the 24/7 Sports Composite player rating for the 2023 class, there are 6 four-star prospects in New Jersey. There are only 8 in the state of Tennessee. So in terms of, the relative dearth of talent that exists in the North and certainly in the Northeast, for whatever reason, the state of New Jersey has kind of always been an area where that's not necessarily true. It's actually a hotter bed for recruiting, you might think. Some of the best players, for instance, that Jim Harbaugh has gotten in Michigan have come from the state of New Jersey. That's been a little bit of a pipeline there. Wisconsin has had a pipeline to the state of New Jersey over the years that it's actually one of those geographic spots that having a little bit of a tie to is probably not that bad of a thing. I'm not saying that Georgia's going to build its talent pipeline there in the Garden State. That's not what I'm saying, although in the case of Noshan Moreno, it didn't work out too badly for UGA. My point, though, is that if you are the kind of program that has the ability to recruit nationally, getting a great player to the state of New Jersey at some point in time is not an unreasonable thing to expect to happen. And so Fran Brown's ties to that state are probably not a negative. It's probably a pretty good thing because New Jersey's, a fairly talent-rich area all the way around. Of course, I have no idea how well this is going to work out. This is not the kind of guy that I knew a ton about before he got here, but I do think from his resume, from his biography, there are some things that recommend him. If a guy like Matt Rule liked him, that's the kind of thing that makes it easy to probably agree with. If a guy like this is, working there at Rutgers and developing deep ties to a state that's not really, barren when it comes to the kinds of guys who could be going to play in the SEC, that's probably not a bad thing either. Young, up-and-coming guy, pretty hungry. Those guys seem to work out pretty well for Georgia. Smart's had a pretty good eye for talent when it comes to these things before, recognizing those who are on their way up. Maybe Fran Brown, the latest example of that. But with his hiring and Searles' hiring, it appears that Georgia's got its coaching staff in place for 2022. A lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different stories with all these guys. But the one thing I think you can agree with is it comes together to look like a pretty impressive group, and we'll see how they perform and how they develop, starting with spring practice, which is only going to be a couple of weeks away.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
And we'll do our SEC Through here in a moment, or as we like to call it, cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Before we get a chance to do any of that, I got to tell you about my friends at Royal Caribbean, because I am still basking in the glow, literally. Somebody said in the comment section a little earlier, you can see my tan very well today because I'm wearing the short sleeve shirt. I know that's vain, and I apologize for being that way, but I do enjoy getting a little winter tan. I feel like if you're good and tan in February, now turning into March, you're doing something right in life. So I am happy to have a little bit of a glow going, because I had a great time. We were on Harmony of the Seas last week, my wife and I, and it was just such an incredible experience, whether it be the stuff we were doing, the various ports of call. I told you about Perfect Day Coco Cay yesterday, but also the stuff we're doing on board. We're eating at specialty restaurants like Chops Grill or going to the Johnny Rockets and getting a burger and a shake. We're enjoying the shows. There's an aqua theater show on Harmony of the Seas that we were on. There's a huge like aqua amphitheater type thing on the back of the ship, and there's a high diving show. This is like a really amazing performance, and it's just so cool to see. Like I'm talking about very, very high dives on the ship while it's moving at sea. First of all, I'm kind of wobbling around as it is. These folks are diving off these, high dive type things. It's an incredible show. There's a great ice skating show we had a chance to see. I told you before, like I was walking around one night, there's like live music being played at 5 different venues on board the ship. It's just such an incredible experience, and I want all of you to be a part of the same kind of experience, at least a similar experience with us. I'm actually looking forward to being on a different ship when we go in April, Independence of the Seas, sailing out of Port Canaveral. We're leaving on April 25th, going to Nassau, going to Perfect Day Coco Cay, and there is still a little bit of time for you to join us. And space is limited here. Obviously, everything's kind of getting filled up, and everybody's getting their travel plans kind of locked away. But if you've been on the fence about this, take it from me as someone who just did this myself. You want to do this. You want to be a part of this great Royal Caribbean cruise experience. See Perfect Day Coco Cay. Have some fun in Nassau. We did a great snorkeling experience in Nassau. It's a cool port. You can do a lot of different things in. Big harbor. Go to Paradise Island or something like that. There's all kinds of really cool things going on. So go to DawgNation.com. Right there at the top of the page, there's a link to click into that'll get you in touch with our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. They're helping us book all of this up. We're getting some folks locked and loaded, a few more folks ready to go, and we're going to just have a great time on the seas with Royal Caribbean, Independence of the Seas, a beautiful ship, recently amplified, just all kinds of really cool stuff there. Having a terrific time with all of that. So make sure you check out DawgNation.com, or you go to DawgNationCruise.com and find out more about that. Sailing on Independence of the Seas out of Port Canaveral, and getting ready to have some great times and all of that. So we're cruising around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean right now. You heard Mike Griffith say this a moment ago. NFL Scouting Combine begins today. I guess John Mechie said some things. I don't really care about that much one way or another. A lot of the stuff that these guys say, like they're asked questions in a certain way, like what are they supposed to say? It's like, and listen, nobody loves, a hot, comment more than I do and making a big deal about things. I told you before, I'm a little bit of a carnival barker by nature, but some of the things that some of these players sometimes get criticized for saying, it's like when the question is kind of framed in a certain way, it's like, what are they supposed to say? So I don't know that I make a big deal about necessarily all that kind of stuff. I did think this was kind of interesting, though. And it just sort of speaks to what's happening with UGA guys in the combine. So there's a guy named Josh Edwards, CBSSports.com. They're kind of doing some pre-combine stories. And I thought this was really interesting. Let me see if I can find this. So here's the question that was posed in kind of a roundtable type fashion. Which under-the-radar prospect is bound to be a household name after the combine? That's a pretty interesting thing to have. Pretty interesting thing to have said. Under-the-radar prospect bound to be a household name after the combine. And Edwards from CBSSports.com says he thinks it's going to be Georgia linebacker Quay Walker. Listen to this. He's built like a superhero and should move like one as well. There is buzz that he will test as one of the best prospects pound for pound. How about that? In an era where NFL teams value speed at the linebacker position and the ability to move sideline to sideline unencumbered, Walker should be coveted by many. Boy, I have no idea who this writer for CBS Sports is. I don't know if he's a respected expert or not, but boy, that's high praise for Quay Walker there. That's pretty cool to be able to see. And I don't know. I mean, you've heard me say this before, but I'll reiterate this right now. I love the idea that role players at UGA, guys who had a chance to go transfer, maybe get more glory somewhere else, but stuck it out at Georgia, filled a role, never quite got the level of superstar attention that other players did. Guys like this are now finally getting the I mean, the ultimate reward we all want is the payday, right? And so Quay Walker may have never appeared on the media guide, didn't go to SEC media days, never appeared on the cover of the tickets or anything like that. But he's about to be dadgum rich, it sounds like, on the basis of what he's about to do with the NFL scouting combine because of how hard he worked and grinded there at UGA. This is the way it's all supposed to go. I just think that's a great thing to be able to see, and assuming the guy from CBSSports.com is correct in all of that, I love a good happy ending. And I hope Georgia does use this. And it's not just because I mean, obviously I'm a Georgia partisan here, so I want good things for Georgia. But this is what we want football to be. At least I think it should be. You know, this thing where you're chasing glory, you're chasing attention, you're craving stats. I get the idea of the short-term gain, and it's hard to want to turn that down. I do get that. But, man, there is something truly valuable about saying, I'm going to spend my 4 years as a place. I'm going to work to get better. You're never going to hear a peep out of me. I can't think of 5 words that Quay Walker said the entire time he was at UGA. Like he threw the hat when he flipped from Alabama to Georgia. He flipped the Tennessee hat, but he flipped the Tennessee hat and came to Georgia. I never heard a peep out of him after that ever again. Like he's just like lunch pail, comes, shows up, does his work, and according to this guy, he's going to be pound for pound one of the best prospects of the NFL scouting combine. That's thrilling I hope it turns out to be true. That is really thrilling to hear. So good stuff there on that. A couple of other things here very quickly for a moment. I thought there was a very interesting story. It was the Montgomery Advertiser that had this. And, this is one of those things, it sounds like we're kind of picking on Brian Harsin. I guess we typically do. But this is a little bit different in terms of if you really want to speak to why a guy like Harsin's not succeeding at Auburn, and ultimately what is a bigger problem for him than any unfounded rumors that to this point in time have turned out to be, the best we can tell, completely untrue, because Auburn looked for a reason to find him and couldn't find one. But the issue ultimately with why I think they want to fire him is really related more to what the guy from the Montgomery Advertiser wrote about a little bit in terms of the fact that there are a lot of high-profile high school coaches in the state of Alabama who say they haven't met Brian Harsin. Let me give you one example of this. So are you familiar with Thompson High School in Birmingham? This is a big-time program. Think about like Tony Mitchell. Think about Peter Woods. Think about huge prospects. A couple of 5-star type guys from a year ago there as well. Thompson is a major producer of prospects, and the head coach there is Mark Freeman. So Mark Freeman's the head coach at Thompson High School in Alabaster, Alabama. Big-time 5-star prospects the last couple of years, including a couple of guys for this year. And Freeman says he hasn't met Brian Harsin. Like, how is it that if you're Brian Harsin, that a guy like, the head coach at Thompson High School in Alabama would say, yeah, I'm not really sure what he's all about, who he is. We haven't met each other yet. Like that's crazy to me. Now, Thompson doesn't necessarily criticize him for that in the story. He just says he hasn't met him. It's just a fact that Harsin hasn't been to Thompson High School to meet him as of yet. Now, Auburn's not winning with those kind of prospects, the Mitchells and whatnot. But the point that a lot of, and there are a ton of high school coaches interviewed in this article, and this is really probably, even though it's interesting to hear the way in which that Harsin is failing with some of the best high school coaches in the state of Alabama, what's more interesting and what made the story itself worth my time to share it with you here a little bit is there were several high school coaches who said something in this article that I thought was really very instructive about the way in which you establish a program somewhere and the way in which you establish yourself as the kind of guy who's going to have some staying power in a state. And the one thing a lot of these coaches said over and over again is, hey, are you only talking to me when I have a player who can play for you, or are you talking to me every single year? Talking to me about the guys that I played against and getting my thoughts on them. Just establishing a relationship with me. And we all know this, right? We've got some friends who seem to only want to be around us when they want something from us, and maybe sometimes we're that friend that only reaches out to somebody else when we want something from them. And that always just feels wrong, right? And you can always tell if you're doing it to somebody else, or you can always tell if somebody else is trying to do that to you, that making a relationship transactional like that just something about that doesn't quite feel right. And it's interesting to hear these coaches say, whether it be Harsin or somebody else, I can tell when a college coach wants a transactional relationship with me. When this is not a person who wants to be in kind of a long-range relationship where we just kind of, you stop by the school, we just sort of chop it up a little bit, and there's really very little to be gained by you from doing that. We're just doing that because that's what you do. I think that's really pretty interesting to hear these coaches say that Brian Harsin just kind of fails there in that regard. I think that's pretty interesting to hear that. One more thing I'll get to you here as well. Interesting column in the LA Times the other day about the SEC kind of being the big loser related to the lack of college football playoff expansion. And I think most people kind of view that as to be pretty ridiculous. In the case of Greg Sankey, he said over and over again, hey, we weren't asking for this to begin with. The idea that not expanding somehow hurts us, he says, listen, we just had 2 teams play for the national championship. Clearly the 4-team playoffs working out pretty well for us right now. But the actual columnist, who I'm not all that familiar with, he said something else in this story that I thought was kind of interesting. I wanted to share this with you for a moment. He says about the notion that the SEC could eventually threaten just to kind of pull out of the college football playoff. He says, would that be an empty threat? Probably. Sankey's constituents are deeply driven by a desire for regional superiority. However, college football can't just mean more, and he puts that in italics, in the SEC if the conference can't prove it against the rest of the union. I wonder if that's so true. I mean, I have to admit, I do think about this a good bit. When you look at certain leagues and what seems to be a lack of commitment to the sport at the same level the SEC has, certainly a lack of talent in comparison to what the SEC kind of has dominating it right now, does it really benefit the SEC for the rest of time to continue to go through the facade and the charade of acting like there are 4 other leagues at the same level the SEC is? There's a portion of the Big Ten that probably plays at the same level the SEC does, but boy, the portion even of that league that actually does that seems to be getting smaller and smaller. I think the columnist here, even though he brings this up somewhat rhetorically or sarcastically, I'm not quite so sure that at some point in time in the future we aren't talking more about this. That is there really much of a point in the SEC validating other leagues, such as the Pac-12 or the Big 12 or the ACC, by participating in the same postseason that these inferior leagues get a chance to participate in? I think it's worth considering that in the very near future, and I think that's pretty interesting. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management, before we get ready to wrap up today, I want to mention something here really quickly. I'm going to do this kind of fast. So obviously I'm as frustrated as anyone by being a big, long-time baseball fan, Major League Baseball in particular. I am very, very frustrated about the continued work stoppage and the lockout imposed by the owners that's now going to postpone the start of the season. Opening day is not going to happen as planned based on all the stuff that's come out over the last couple of days. But I have to wonder. I saw the Diamond Dogs get a nice win against Wofford last night up in Greenville. Long game, 4-hour-plus game. With the Diamond Dogs getting ready to also play a weekend series coming up against Georgia Tech, I have to kind of wonder. Now, I've admitted this before. I'm a little late to the party on this, but over the course of the last 5 years, I've pretty well discovered that college baseball is a really fun sport. These SEC weekend series where you have the ace pitchers going on Friday, by the time you get to Sunday, it's sort of a Johnny Holstaff thing where you're just trying to, get the win and move on. The atmosphere around these ballparks, it's really pretty amazing. So, I don't know, maybe, obviously we can't talk a ton of baseball on the show because, so much of our audience wants to hear the daily, grind with the football team. But I do hope that the SEC, Diamond Dogs, UGA in particular, I do hope college baseball gets some much-deserved attention here this spring since there will be no Major League Baseball. And my thought is that more folks kind of do pay attention to that. I think what they're going to discover is that college baseball, the brand played at Foley Field across the SEC, is actually pretty entertaining. The way in which the SEC network covers this, more available than it's ever been before. And maybe you may find out that you don't miss baseball quite so much because baseball has actually not gone away. It's actually a pretty cool brand of baseball being played at the college level, aluminum bats, the loud pings, and everything else. And I think some folks who tune in to enjoy that might find out that it's actually a pretty good product. All right, as we wrap up here today, Golden Shoe time. We'll go back in the past here for a little bit because I thought this was really funny. So we have some Alabama fans and some non-Georgia fans who kind of participate in our comment sections on a regular basis just because there's not a lot of shows like this. And so they have kind of a little bit of fun doing some of that kind of stuff. And some of our Georgia fan listeners and viewers like to give a hard time to some of those guys and gals every now and then. And so I guess this is a thing now. I was out of town when this happened, but 218... that's obviously the second 18 touchdown play for Georgia and A.D. Mitchell. Frankie Fibonacci says, don't forget to wish one of our Alabama fans, we call him G. Grace, a happy 218 for second 18 for Georgia. So Georgia fans have certainly been on the receiving end of some of that kind of stuff in the past, and Frankie Fibonacci says, now we're going to turn the tables and all that, so we'll make Frankie a golden shoe winner for today. By the way, lousy, stinking Gators, long national title drought for them. Gatorade updater, 4,801 days. And then back in Jacksonville, beating Florida again for the first time under Billy Napier, 241 days from right now. That is our Gatorade countdown. We will see you tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And here on our first and R.S. Andrews cool down, you can tell I'm still a little sloppy, getting back into the groove again after having been on vacation. Let's do our R.S. Andrews cool down, and on video is what I'm trying to say here, and on video, R.S. Andrews cool down style. We may have a surprise coming up in a couple of minutes here. Hopefully we can present that for you. We'll see how that goes. Can't promise too much on that, but we'll see if we can do this for you here in just a little bit. But before we do that, R.S. Andrews cool down style, your comments, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. Had a little bit of an issue with our first and 15 today. I apologize to folks on that. So maybe as a way of saying sorry for that, we'll go to DawgNation.com first and get some comments over there. Let's see what else. Randy Hall, the subject of Atlanta Falcons, thinking about some of those Georgia guys maybe ending up in Atlanta. Listen, they need all the help they can get. They really do. All the help they can get. I am curious to see what they do with the 8th overall pick, but boy, it's going to take a lot to fix what they got going on. Hassan says he thinks that Nakobe Dean benefited from the defensive line. Well, there's no doubt that he did benefit from that. There's no doubt of that. But, I mean, I'll give Connor Riley I'll give him the credit for being, I believe, the first to say this, and I think it's not ridiculous. Connor said a few weeks ago that he thought that Nakobe Dean had a better year than Roquan Smith did, and I think there's a chance that's true. I really do. And I didn't think it'd be possible that would ever be true. I mean, I thought that Roquan had one of the best single seasons that any player at Georgia had ever had. But I don't think it's ridiculous to say that Nakobe had a better year than Roquan did. I don't. Senior Dog 54 says, I'll take any of that Matt Rule defensive staff from Baylor. In my opinion, they were one of the most physical teams we'd played in years. Yeah, I mean, I think even though Georgia got that win, I think the lead up to the Sugar Bowl that year, I think a lot of Georgia fans learned a lot about Matt Rule that they liked. And so, yeah, getting someone who's got some ties to Matt Rule is probably not a bad thing. Excuse me, I am not the world's biggest Greg Schiano fan. I don't mind telling you that, although clearly he's had some success coming back in as Rutgers coach. So I don't necessarily vouch and tout the Schiano portion of Brown's resume as much, but the Rule thing I really do like a lot. All right, so we got Mike Griffith here live in Indianapolis. Are we going to hear this at all? Or okay, let's bring up some sound here. And so Mike is in Indianapolis, getting in position, and I think we're going to get a chance to see George Pickens here in just a minute. This is actually, it's also kind of interesting just kind of see how these media events go. This is quite the scrum here that Mike's involved in. This is live from Indianapolis right now. And like a lot of live things, we have no idea how this is going to go. That's kind of part of the fun of all this. But you see Mike kind of making his way there in Indianapolis, trying to get I don't know where he's going. In position. And if these private conversations become a little too public, we'll have to kind of cut out of the audio on this. But Mike getting in position here. Are we going to hear from Pickens or are we going to see him run? It almost looks like Mike's in a press conference here. So we're going to get a chance to hear from maybe George Pickens here a little bit. So let's let Mike have his say here and see what's going on here.
So they have moved the podium. This is one of the fun parts of being a reporter. You can see there's some pretty mass craziness here. They pulled George Pickens' placard card. The joke here is that Kirby Smart is not letting him talk. They're saying Kirby pulled Pickens from the podium. I don't know if that's true. Probably not. But I'm not really sure where we're going to see George Pickens or if we're going to see George Pickens. This has happened before. Players get pulled from the podium last minute. Various reasons. They may have testing. They may be meeting with teams. But right now, no George Pickens. That's the report from here. Jameson Williams is up there from Alabama talking right now. I'm sure he's telling everybody how well Alabama would have played had he stayed healthy in the championship game. There was a story up on DawgNation already from John Mechie this morning. The Alabama wide receiver went earlier. So first day blues for Georgia.
Can he hear me?
Combine in terms of the podium interviews.
Mike, can you hear me?
George Pickens, the only scheduled interview for Georgia today. They have pulled his placard card. The good news is 13 more dogs expected to go on the podiums Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So some disappointment here.
Mike, can you hear me?
I can't hear anything here. BA, I apologize.
No worries.
I don't have any ability to hear you on this end, so all I can do is talk and tell you what's going on here.
Why don't we give Mike
I'm not sure what's going to happen with George Pickens if he does talk.
All right, why don't we give Mike a break? Let's text him and tell him thanks for tuning in, and if he gets something else, we'll go back to him. And we're going to try to do that for you today, give you a little live on the scene there from the combine. And even you get very far away from Athens, Georgia, even still, it's kind of hard to get some of these Georgia guys in front of a microphone. Apparently, in the case of George Pickens, we were hoping to get a chance to hear from him right there. But you also get a chance to see, and I say this in very sarcastic terms, the glamorous life lived by a reporter there. And, I do this kind of stuff from time to time, too. Like, I'm not in Athens quite as much. But in a lot of these, you think about them like scrums or frays, where you really have no idea where anything's going to be, and you're trying to get a camera in position. Back in the old days, when all you had was a pen and a notepad, it didn't really matter where things took place because you could just, go scribble down your notes, whatever. But now everybody wants to get a little bit of video. You want to show up live. So let's make sure we text and communicate with him. Thanks for joining us, and we'll get him back if he's got anything to share. So we'll see if that goes on. But you're live on video. You're trying to move around. You're trying to get in place. You're trying to do those kinds of things. So that is not an easy life. Now, listen, no one's going to shed tears, but in terms of being where you need to be, oftentimes not getting the most cooperation in terms of who's going where and what's happening. That is just kind of how all that goes. So for sure on that. All right, so we'll check. I told you we might have a surprise for you. That was our attempt at a surprise. And you know what? When it's live, it's almost like I'm going to date myself with the reference, but it's almost like Al Capone's vault here for a little bit with Geraldo Rivera. It's like, hey, we may have something really good, or we may just have an empty vault. In this case, we may have turned out to be an empty vault, but at least we're trying. At least we're trying. All right, let's see what else. And Senior Dog, yeah, I mean, like for the most part, like you may have even seen this going back to the SEC championship, stuff like that. It's like for the most part, media even though like the mask stuff seems to be changing for a lot of places, and gosh knows I'm not going to share my opinion about that one way or another, nor do I solicit your opinion. But for the most part, man, the media is still going to be pretty masked up. They like putting the media in masks. That's a very big deal. Randy Hall says there's a Zoom call in the future. Yeah, we tried one. All I can say is we tried. Brian Whitehead says, I live in Macon, and the Mercer baseball team is really good, too. I think college baseball is missing exposure. It's just as good as Major League Baseball, maybe better. Mercer beat Florida State last night after 11 innings, 6-5. That's actually a really good win for the Bears there. And I'm telling you right now, the in-stadium atmosphere for college baseball is extraordinary. Extraordinary. I know this is going to sound like hyperbole, but there's a way in which it's actually better than Major League Baseball, as Brian mentions here, because Major League Baseball is 162 games. Now, listen, I love the fact that from April to September, you can always just like turn on the TV and just be entertained by Braves baseball each and every night. I love that, but the long presence of it all, the long grind of the season, does reduce the value of each and every individual game. Whereas college baseball is a much shorter season. There is that kind of college intensity to the way in which fans cheer for their team, that it makes the individual games themselves seem bigger. Like you get a Foley Field on a Friday night with ace pitcher for UGA against ace pitcher for whatever the team. Like that's intense, man. That is intense. And listen, don't even get me started. And I know that Georgia hasn't had as much success in this recently, but you get me a regional or a super regional. I remember a few years ago being at a Russ Chandler Stadium in Atlanta for the super regional between Georgia and Georgia Tech. And I mean, that's intense. I was also in Athens a couple of years ago for the regional in which Georgia lost to Florida State, which was, not such a good thing. But man, that is super intense. And the crowd is great. I know that Foley Field's not quite as big as like some of these, beautiful ballparks that some of these SEC teams have, and I do get all of that. Maybe in the years to come that'll change. But like the one thing that the SEC network makes, it's way easier to cover this stuff than it used to be. Like, my cable provider, I can just click on the SEC Network Plus stuff from my box. Like, I don't have to like go to another device to watch it. I can just, for the most part, click in and watch those games when they're available. I don't know if last night's game was available or not, but I can just kind of click in there and watch that with one click of my remote. Following the sport of college baseball has never been easier. It's one of the things that the SEC network kind of drives me crazy about certain things, certain times. But their ability to make other sports more enjoyable by following them more closely, no doubt that's true. All right, let's get some Facebook and some YouTube. Let me do YouTube first because I believe I did Facebook before that yesterday. Over here on the YouTube side of things. Yeah, so if Mike has anything else for us, we'll get that to him live. All right, let's see. All right, so George Pickens is going to do something later on today, so that's probably after we're done on the show today. So maybe we'll get a chance to see that. Maybe we'll get a chance to see that on the DawgNation video channels kind of later on this afternoon. So that'll be kind of cool. Jonathan Aaron says, in my eyes, who will be the backup quarterback this year? Brock Vandagriff or Gunnar Stockton? I don't think you can discount Carson Beck from that yet. I believe that Carson Beck is looking to stick around, be a part of that competition, and I would probably favor both Carson and Brock over Gunnar right now just because Gunnar just got here. And I've said before that I have a little bit of a, I don't know, call it a soft spot or an intuition about Brock Vandagriff. I think that Vandagriff has a chance to be a really extraordinary prospect. But, Beck's a guy who's been here for a couple of years. And, Beck's a guy who right now, the best I can tell, is kind of intent on being part of this competition. So I would go, to me, the real competition is between Carson and Brock about being the backup quarterback, with Gunnar Stockton kind of there, hoping to get a chance to show what he's all about. But it's those guys who've been in the system who I think are going to have their first chance to sort of show what they're all about here. Green Soldier on the subject of Stacey Searles being a short-term fit. Green, I don't mind telling you this, and maybe I said this yesterday, maybe I didn't. I sort of view all these guys as short-term guys right now. And maybe you're right that the Searles thing is more likely to be that than others are. I don't know. I mean, it seems like a lot of these Georgia coaches seem to know him pretty well and seem to like him. So maybe this is a better fit for them than maybe some fans have given it credit for. But, I mean, Georgia just lost 4 guys off the national championship staff. And in one case, it's a guy becoming a head coach. In another case, it's a guy going back to his home state. In another case, it's, whatever it was. A couple of these are a little bit more difficult to describe. But, I mean, there was huge turnover for Georgia off this most recent staff, and not all of it was driven by obvious positivity. So I just don't know that that any hire now is for more than a couple of years down the road. I mean, what we have, Kamani McLean was complaining about that the other day, about always having to get to know one of these new position coaches, and that's just kind of the way things are. I'm not saying that recruiting matters less than it used to, but in terms of developing those long-range relationships, there may be a mechanism that needs to be in place other than your specific position coach to be able to do that, because you do have to have long-range recruitment for linemen, offensive and defensive linemen, the kind of big guys who are athletic enough to play in the SEC. There are so few of them that long-range recruiting is always going to matter with them. But the way in which you establish those long-term relationships, it may just not be with a position coach as much because, and I don't know, maybe 6 months from now I'll be singing a different tune. I guess you can remind me if I am. But for now, I just don't know that I think of anyone as a long-range projection. I mean, Georgia's been lucky to have a guy like Del McGee here for a while, and hopefully, guys like Todd Hartley are sticking around for a while, and Glenn Schumann obviously now kind of moving his way up, getting promoted, things like that. But beyond that, who is sticking around anywhere for a long time these days? DMAR42 says Beck just wasn't ready come UAB. It happens, not ready to write anyone off, just the best Just want the best one to play. I agree with a lot of what D-Mart says there. And I think I've said this before, that if I was trying to talk to Carson Beck and trying to convince him of why I think he should stay, the name I'm throwing at him is Mac Jones. And I might even mention Kyle Trask there a little bit too, but certainly Mac Jones in terms of, there are plenty of people who didn't think Mac Jones was ever going to play at Alabama. Now he's the starting quarterback for the New England Patriots. That this notion that you are going to transfer somewhere else and have the success that you think you deserve. And I don't mean you in terms of Beck, I mean you in terms of anybody. That there are, I would suggest, almost as many examples of patience being rewarded as there are transfer being the key to great success. I think the actual success stories for transfer quarterbacks on a ratio basis is probably smaller than people realize. And the success stories in terms of the guys who choose to stick it out, staying in a system they're comfortable with, don't discount living in a town and going to a school they are also comfortable with. Because when you go somewhere else, everything is new. And it is very difficult to compartmentalize, the new stuff that matters versus the new stuff that doesn't. Being uncomfortable with where you're living can also affect the level of comfort you have with what you're learning about football. And so staying in a comfortable environment, trying to grow and develop that way, I just think there's a chance that's actually maybe a more tried and true method for having the success you need to enjoy. Because everybody wants to play in the NFL, and here's what you need to know. One good season is all you need. One good season. That if Beck were to stick it out at UGA, and who knows how good he would be if he ever got a chance to play, but if he were to stick it out at UGA and eventually emerge as the starting quarterback, even if it's for just 1 year can change your life. Whereas, in the wrong spot, in the wrong program, working for the wrong coach, even 3 years of playing time may not add up to what you want it to be. And to go back to the situation with UAB when Stetson Bennett first stepped in, I do think there is something to be said for, it's one thing to be the backup quarterback, which is what a lot of us were led to believe was true for Carson Beck, when the starting quarterback is healthy. But when that guy is taken off the field, this isn't like a constitutionally mandated succession plan. At that point in time, the value of Bennett having played more and having previously started games made him, I believe, more valuable to the coaching staff there at that moment. That's not so much a ding against Carson Beck. It was just one of those things of, if we have to start a guy other than our expected starter, let's start someone who started a game before. I think it's just as simple as that. And Bennett made the most of his opportunity, and the rest was history. I don't think it's an indictment of Carson Beck. I truly don't. Let's see what else. Wally Smith says, I'm a Vandegrift fan. There's a lot about Brock Vandegrift I really like. I think the level of athleticism he possesses is really unlike a lot of what we've seen from Georgia quarterbacks in the past. People talk about Stetson Bennett's mobility. I think that the Vandegrift mobility is going to really be quite impressive, especially the ability to kind of keep plays alive with his legs, giving himself a chance to make the big throw. It's one of the things I felt like I saw from him in high school. And listen, at the high school level, those passes weren't always completions because you're playing at the high school level. But I think you certainly saw a level of athleticism there that I think is really pretty interesting. So, yeah. Jay Shipes, who likes to give me a hard time about previously touting Texas A&M, says, BA, knowing that Jimbo Fisher can throw $30 million at 30 high school recruits, are you concerned this shady individual will be able to reach these part-time SEC officials? Jay, I don't quite know how to answer that. First of all, I don't think that the $30 million fund that's been kind of kicked around for Texas A&M, I just don't think it's true. But could then you use that same money to pay off officials? I guess. I would certainly hope that's not the case. But very funny nonetheless. Let's see what else. Jonathan Aaron brings up a pretty good point. I think one of the things I may try to do is, because the honest truth is, I don't remember a ton about the first Stacey Searles go around either. At least I don't seem to remember that as well as some people do. So I just know that it was, in total, just kind of we may actually try to bring on somebody who has better memory of that. I have a couple of ideas for that. We may try to do that. So we shall see. I don't want to say too much, but I'm going to try to do something related to that here pretty soon. GAT 404 dogs laughing at Jay for getting me. Listen, man, I never know what Jay's going to say. It is always an adventure with him for sure. Always an adventure. All right, let's see what else is going on Facebook. And then after that, we got to get ready to go. All right, here we go on the DawgNation Facebook side of things for a moment. Here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management today. Ken Holcomb on the subject of George Pickens. I just think they decided to just kind of move it around. A lot of this kind of stuff is just like logistical, and he just may have wires crossed or something like that. Tennille Calvino says it's Lynn Johnson Shipman's birthday. Lynn, happy birthday. That's exciting news. I hope you're celebrating in style and having a great time. That's really cool. Really cool. Happy birthday. Nick Roundtree says, speaking of officiating, the only thing that would have made the win sweeter in Indianapolis if Penn Wagers would have been a part of the officiating crew. Although if Penn had been there, maybe the result would have been far different. How about Barry Watkins throwing a little cold water on the comment section today, thinking that Arch Manning's going to go to Texas? I don't know that I think that. I don't know that I think that. Yeah, Lynn, happy birthday. Good to see you. Good to see you in here. Happy birthday. Hope you have a great, great time. Hugh Nash says, I'm going to be like, what's with all the eyebrow and airplane, the movie talk? So sometimes I wish that we would have a little bit more freedom to talk about some other things from time to time. I think that'd just be kind of nice. Now, sometimes we do, but man, I get grief. Every time I go off script, man, I get grief. Some people tolerate it a little bit. I think you're right. Facebook seems to be a little bit more comfortable with that than some of our other comment sections, but by this point in the show, we've been on now for an hour and a half. Like, I feel like we would earn the right to maybe kind of get into the lighter side here a little bit, but some people do not like it when I do that, which I understand. I mean, their thought is, this is the place I come to for UGA football talk, and so I try to stay on brand for them, but it'd just be fun every now and then to spread our wings a little bit. Stephen Brock says, what do you think our best game will be this coming season? So let me kind of go back and we said off the top of the show about the Tennessee thing. That while I don't believe that Tennessee is probably set up this year to be as good as Matt Hayes tried to sell you on them being on the pages of Saturday Down South, I mean, one thing we did see a year ago is that both Arkansas and Kentucky turned out to be better in season, especially Arkansas, than we would have thought before the year began. And those were not really games that Georgia fans had circled, and yet ESPN's College Game Day visited Athens in back-to-back weeks for those games because when they were played, they're viewed to be a little bit bigger than they were originally given credit for. So there is a chance that there is a game on the Georgia schedule that kind of shows up as bigger than it appears to be now. And I guess, the Tennessee game ends up being that for lack of another option. I mean, I think you really strain to find the obvious deal here. Now, that means you maybe get a surprise. Here's what I'll tell you. I think that at South Carolina on September 17th, let's see what South Carolina does. Hold on. So they play Georgia State. How about this? They are at Arkansas on September 10th. This is South Carolina's at Arkansas on September 10th. That's a tough spot. Arkansas is going to have a loud crowd that day. That's a long trip for South Carolina. But they're going to have Spencer Rattler, quarterback. Could Rattler go into Reynolds Razorback Stadium and win that game? So let's say that you're South Carolina, you win at Arkansas September 10th. Not going to be easy. Arkansas will be the favorite that day. KJ Jefferson's, a good returning quarterback too. But it's not impossible to say that South Carolina could win at Arkansas. Williams-Brice Stadium's already a loud stadium anyway. So on the heels of winning on the road against a ranked Arkansas team, and Arkansas probably will be, winning as an underdog, pulling that surprise, being 2-0 there at that point in time, could you have hype for the Georgia game at South Carolina? When Georgia played there in 2018, that was a top 25 matchup, blazing hot. I mean, just blazing hot. And Columbia will be just the surface of the sun on September 17th. We know that's the truth. For whatever reason, Columbia is the hottest place on the planet. So I kind of look at September 17th at South Carolina. I don't expect Georgia to lose the game. I don't even really expect Georgia to be really all that challenged. Georgia hasn't played a close game in Columbia in a long time. But could I see that game being somewhat hyped up? I think I probably could. As far as the rest of it goes, Tennessee in November in Athens, kind of interesting. How about you got 2 interesting back-to-back road games here. Georgia's back-to-back on the road at Mississippi State and at Kentucky. That's November 12th and November 19th. That's very interesting to have 2 late road games in the SEC like that. And I think both those are kind of like the sort of swing type teams. There's some analytics love for Mississippi State right now. Kentucky just made what is, probably a pretty nice hire as far as the offensive coordinator goes. So look at those 3 road games. Georgia has 4 true SEC road games next season. I don't think much about going to Farrat Field from Missouri, but at South Carolina, at Mississippi State, at Kentucky, the chances of at least one of those games being somewhat hyped, I'd say is probably pretty good. And then the Tennessee game is one that's kind of already getting some attention. So long answer to a short question. Let's see what else. Barry Watkins says Arkansas is going to win the West. Barry, that would be quite a story. Now, listen, 2 years in a row, they've been a pretty impressive team, but that'd be quite a story. Matt Rukavina says Spencer Rattler's going to be Spencer Snakeskin Boots after our game at Kakalaki. So Matt's already cutting a promo on Spencer Rattler here, which I'd like to see. I like to see that. Keith Fold says Williams-Brice is terribly high. It really is. I don't know that I'm supposed to say this or not, but I will just admit it. I love Williams-Brice Stadium. I really do. I love the fact those fans make noise no matter how bad South Carolina's been. I've been in that stadium in some years in which the Gamecocks were really kind of awful. But South Carolina fans are really good fans. I do think that. Now, some of them are, knuckleheads, but everybody has some of those within their fan base. But I think that Willie B is a pretty cool environment. I really do, and that's as close as I'll come to giving credit to a Georgia somewhat rival. But I don't hate Williams-Brice Stadium as an environment for the SEC. Bill Sanders also brings a really good point that it kind of sits there on that state farm, not state farm. It's a very different thing. State fairground, the fairground area. It's very flat, a lot of concrete. A lot of pavement, asphalt type stuff. There's very little trees around there. That's part of the reason why it's probably so hot is because it's got nothing but like heat-seeking ground all around it. Barry Watkins says the drive to South Carolina is boring, nothing but swamp water. Columbia's not a bad place to spend a weekend, though. Staying in town, not a bad place to spend a weekend. Decent restaurant scene. Especially if you're close enough to kind of walk to the stadium. Ken Holcomb says the season is over, so it's cool to talk about other sports happenings, in my opinion. He says, I'm a sports fan, not just a football fan. He says, ad lib on BA. So thanks, Ken. I appreciate your endorsement of that. Georgiana Olive says the squawking chicken gets on my nerves. Somebody else said the sandstorm thing gets on their nerves. Gerald Harmon says, I do like Darius Rucker and Hootie the Blowfish, so there you go on that. Yeah, they have a lot of sound effects. For some reason, it doesn't – I don't know. I get why it annoys people, but I've always kind of felt like the fact that they find a way to create an atmosphere no matter how bad they are is kind of a decent thing. Tiffany Art says, I live in South Carolina, so Williams-Brice is only an hour from me. I always go to that game. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of folks kind of East Georgia or up there in Columbia area. A lot of us have that one game that's a little closer to us than the others, and that's always kind of a nice thing. It's always cool, too, when we go on games like this. You always see a good number of Georgia fans at all these different places, and a lot of that is for that very reason. Frank Patterson says Columbia used to be a better place to stay the weekend when the club by the zoo was still up and running. I can only imagine what that must have been like. What else? D-Mart says it is a good environment for sure. It doesn't happen often, but a little worse than hearing that. Yeah, the chicken. Nobody likes the chicken. And I do understand that. Also, there's a little chatter about our buddy Matt Breda from Breda Pest Management now being a part of our show here. Very happy to have that be here. And by the way, Jordan Bowman checks in, the Clemson fan, saying that Columbia is, in fact, a bad place. And I guess we would expect nothing different from Jordan on that. That's good to see. Oh, yeah, Frank Patterson also brings up a good point. What's no longer there, and I've eaten meals in this place more times than I could count, and I'm very proud of each and every one of them. The old Bojangles used to be right next to the stadium. Boy, I loved that. I ate there so many times. So many times. Big Dog Brett says there's always plenty of fried chicken for sale, though, in Columbia, and that is true. Georgia chopping down on some every time they go up there, at least recently. Let's see what else. All right, one more trip to DawgNation.com, then we got to go. Good stuff today. Hugh Nash says, I think, okay, so are we doing something live here again? All right, let's see how this goes.
Come back.
Oh, there you go. This is George Pickens.
Yeah,
let's watch it live.
I watch Devontae Adams a lot. I'm bigger than Devontae Adams, but that's kind of the lane I want to kind of go into with the size I am, because a guy who can move is almost unguardable.
What are your best chances?
My ball skills for sure. Contested catches, catching over the middle, and drawing penalties. I'm really good at drawing penalties on DBs.
The pass catching aspect, that's obviously there. What's your approach to your mindset when it comes to the blocks, and how much the fan at Georgia is on that team?
Yeah, we got some good backs on our team too. James Cooks and Miro White, Kenny McIntosh. And me just blocking was always been a part of the program and part of the scheme of the team. So, and I've always been physical. So, like, that's just one of the things that I can also add to my game besides pass catching and besides going deep. So, blocking is for sure one of the things I pride myself on.
How do you feel Georgia prepared you for the NFL?
I feel like they did a really good job preparing people for the NFL, including myself. Really, the routine that we do at Georgia, practice is very similar. We got an NFL-type practice. We got NFL-type players. Half of the players on my team are here. So, like, almost like you in the league already.
You're hearing George Pickens live from the NFL Scouting Combine in Indianapolis here on DawgNation Daily, presented by
I'll
Brady
probably
Pest
tell
Management.
freshman George, you didn't know it was going to happen like this. But it's one thing or another. So I'll probably tell freshman George that just keep working. That's something I didn't know in 2019.
Coach, I know you get to play with him in college. We're looking forward to it. And DawgNation grew up playing with him. So
Yeah.
what kind of guy is he to his teammates in Oregon? What's he like? What should they look forward to in a quarterback?
Yeah, Bo Nix is actually he's a great quarterback, to be honest. He could be here right now also. And the people at Oregon, I think they should just pull out the best in him. He's already got a good motor ahead of him. He already got a good mindset. Type of way he carries himself. He carries himself real private, offline person. And I feel like Oregon, that's a school for him. I feel like that should have been the first choice.
How have the meetings with teams gone, and what did you want them to take away in terms of the kind of guy you are?
I know, like, I really want teams to really just see the person who I am, because the type of play style I am, how I am.
Things are going so well. Nice little taste of I feel like things were perfect, and then they weren't. But, yeah, George Pickens there from the NFL Scouting Combine. And then it just went away. But good stuff there. Mike Griffith on the scene there in Indianapolis. And honestly, George Pickens giving some really thoughtful answers there. You heard some stuff from him talking about his desire to block, his guy he knows going back to his high school days, and Bo Nix, and really giving you some nice thoughtful collection of answers there. Maybe we can get some more of that. If we can get it back, we'll hear some more of George Pickens, but it's probably almost done. So I'll hang around for a minute and see if we can get some more of that. But I thought that was really pretty good. Randy Hall also going back to the conversation we were having a little earlier, that playing on the road against Spencer Rattler might turn out to be a tougher game than expected. And I think it might. I think that Rattler's actually set up to have a pretty good year. I've said before, of the two new quarterbacks at the various USCs, Caleb Williams with the Trojans and Spencer Light with the University of South Carolina down here in the SEC. I actually expect Rattler to have a better year than Caleb Williams. I mean, listen, I think Williams is a tremendous prospect, but gosh, go back and look at his stat line the last few games that he was Oklahoma quarterback. They're actually not very impressive. I mean, what people forget or maybe not aware of is, for as much as that Lincoln Riley was lauded for the courageous decision to bench Rattler and insert Caleb Williams that led to the victory against Texas, by the end of the year, there were a lot of Oklahoma fans who were calling for him to switch back. You know, this was not a happy ending necessarily this past season. Listen, I think that Caleb's a big-time prospect. I really do. But he did not have a great year for Oklahoma last year. Did not have a great year. Bubba says, do I wear sunscreen? So I do wear sunscreen now. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I'll say this really quick. I didn't spend $7 on sunscreen my entire decade of the 20s. From the age of 20 till 30, I probably didn't do sunscreen twice the entire decade. That is not a good thing. That is not a good thing. But now, I mean, when I was gone this past week, I was 100 on the body, 70 on the face, and reapplying a good bit. Honestly, I think when you're in an intense sun environment, I think sunscreen actually helps you get sun. Especially someone like me. Like I said, I take the sun pretty well. But I wear a lot of sunscreen now, and I encourage everybody to do that. Especially on the top. I mean, it's kind of sad. Like now I'm kind of that stage of life where I have to like put a bunch of sunscreen on the top of my head, even though I pretty much wear a hat every time that I'm out. I have a lot of sunscreen. Yeah, a lot of sunscreen in my life these days. All right. I don't know if we're going to any word on we getting that back or not. We're not hearing that. All right, so we were doing so well with that. Let me just kind of say hello to Facebook and YouTube one more time, and we'll see if that gives us one more chance to be kind of back live again. Keith Fold says he put the camera back on Pickens. Maybe the media police took it away. Yeah, maybe that's the case. I thought he was doing a great press conference. It sounds like what Pickens was saying there was really pretty interesting. Hugh Nash says, Perfect Day BA. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good nickname. Perfect Day BA after spending a little time at Coco K. All right, we're back live here in Indianapolis. Let's see how this goes.
His separation. I also watched Cooper Kupp too. I didn't mention that, but I watched Cooper Kupp too. I can watch his separation, and his releases are really the smoothest releases I've probably ever seen besides Ocho Cinco. That's a lot of people compared to Devontae to a lot of other students to the game today, when in reality he's more like Ocho to me.
That emphasis on releases seems unique for a big guy. How do you go about developing, formulating your ideas there and implementing? What's your process on working on releases?
Yeah, depending on I watch a lot of film on DBs too, so if he's over aggressive, I'm going to do a lot of speed release. I'm not going to let him really try to touch me. But if he's like a soft shoe type of guy, that's when you can get in your bag a little bit. You can create more time. You can sauce up your releases for real.
Georgia obviously was chasing a national championship. If it didn't turn out that way, would you come? They didn't win the SEC. They didn't have.
It would have just been harder. It would have been a harder decision, but I would probably get the same decision. And I kind of knew I kind of knew the team that I was on recently was special. I mean, Coach Smart mentioned it many times, so I kind of knew the squad we had was special. Yeah, when I first got to Georgia, I used to watch a lot of Calvin Ridley. He stepped away before the game for a little bit, so it's kind of hard to watch him. Like I used to watch a lot of Calvin. Yeah, Calvin, he's more of like a snap down type of guy. Like he really at the top of his routes, he's real good. I didn't watch too much of him. I'm from Alabama, so I seen him there too. But I didn't really watch too much of him.
George, how does Georgia prepare a receiver for the NFL? What are the benefits of playing in Todd Monken's system?
The biggest benefit is a pro-style offense, and we go into the pros. So, that really helps a lot. He was formerly with the Browns, Baker Mayfield, Odell, that year right there. And that's the offense. We ran the same exact offense. So the biggest benefit is just being in a pro-style offense.
Who are some of the Georgia receivers we should watch for next year now that you're moving on?
I'll probably say Adonai Mitchell. Really, Jermaine Burton, he's no longer a Georgia receiver, but we want to keep our eye on him for sure.
If you have to show one catch to the GM, the head coach, which one is it?
I'll probably say Cincinnati. Peach Bowl, caught the post. It was another diamond catch, kind of how I was here. It was crazy. I also caught a crazy pass at practice that went kind of viral. It's like one-hand catch.
George, what part of your game?
I think my physicality for sure. That's one thing I know at the next level that they're going to have. Guys are going to be big, they're going to be strong, they're going to be fast, they're going to be long. Just playing in the SEC, it really helps that you go against guys like Derek Stingley, J.C. Horn, same guys that are in the league you go against every year. So, like, I feel like being in the SEC really improved my game.
How confident are you your first-round pick, George? We've seen your status that high in some of the projections.
I'm very confident. I know I can present to teams exactly what a first-round pick is. So, like I was saying, my routes, my speed, my intelligence of the game, too. A lot of people don't know that about me. I watch a lot of football.
You mentioned being
Last question, please. Last question.
Being in this city earlier this year, when did it hit you that you won a national title?
When I actually came back here for Monday. I think Monday when we flew in, when all the receivers and the QBs flew in, it really hit me like I just caught a post here. We just won the natty. Like, it really hit me then.
Thank you, George. Thank you for all that.
Thanks.
First of all, that's a really good job by Mike Griffith. And listen, when I pick on Mike, give him grief from time to time, but it is not easy to get in position to give that press conference there. And good audio, nice video quality there, nice special treat here live on the show. Mike does that really well. Some of the stuff he did, from Indianapolis when the team arrived, stuff like that, much the same way. You got to get in there and you got to find a way to get that phone. And, listen, we had a couple of hiccups, but that is not an easy thing to get live there on the screen. And a really cool chance to hear from Pickens right there. And by the way, like, how great does George come off in that interview? This is the guy. Remember, like, the press conference after we're on the air for now for like 100 hours. We're going to get off the air here pretty soon. But remember the press conference after the Sugar Bowl against Baylor when Pickens had the huge game and, like, Kirby was so nervous about Pickens speaking to the media? Remember that? How nervous he was about all of that? Like, Pickens is great right there. Like, why didn't we hear more from him at UGA? He sounds incredible. Now, listen, I realize that he knows this is the most important week of his life, and so therefore, you want to be maybe on your best behavior or whatever else. But, man, how smooth does he come across? Thoughtful answers, remembering his time at UGA, talking about, former UGA teammates, what he had to say about Todd Monken and the offensive system that he played in right there. Like, that is really an incredible press conference performance from a guy that, I don't know. I mean, it's just like, we were always such big fans of George. The career comes by and goes by so fast. I've said before, pound for pound, he may be the most exciting UGA player of my lifetime, and not everybody agrees with that, but I make my case for Pickens in terms of, from a pound for pound standpoint, at any moment on the field, at any time on the field, he could have just done anything. I mean, just could have done anything, and I'm going to miss him. I'm going to miss him big time, both in terms of obviously making Georgia a better team, but just being entertaining. He's just very entertaining. And that press conference, I think, just reiterates that all the much more. It is a real shame that he's not going to be playing football at UGA anymore. But obviously we're also simultaneous to that very happy for him because he's getting a chance to go and fulfill a lifelong dream of getting paid in the NFL. And that was a great press conference. Really good stuff there. So nice job by Mike Griffith getting that on the screen for us there. All right, last comments, then we're gone. Jordan Harris says the Baylor game and the diving catches. Yeah, what's amazing is, like, the one diving catch that he made in the national championship game, exact same play, exact same result of the same thing. Like, these are like the carbon. I mean, it's amazing how similar these two diving catches were. One thrown by Stet, one thrown by JT. But basically the same play, basically the same, like, full extension result. It's amazing how similar those two plays are. And nobody did that kind of thing better than Pickens. And nobody does that better than Pickens, for sure. Jordan Harris says good memories. You better believe they are good memories indeed. Let's see what else. Facebook last time over here. Gerald Herman says, he's growing up. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty mature guy right there. I'd like to have heard from some more at UGA because that's a pretty good press conference, a pretty good press conference performance, which makes you wish you would have got a chance to hear more from him over the years. Joseph Kennedy says, "I hate we didn't get to see the best of Pickens, but injuries happen." Yeah. There's the full extension from the Alabama game right there. I mean, first of all, poor Kool-Aid's barely even in the screen on that one. I've said this before that Kool-Aid McKinstry is my favorite Alabama player of all time. But yeah, look at Pickens right there. That is really something. Really something. Really good stuff. Barry Watkins says the possibility of making money makes you grow up fast. Honestly, the press conference that George did at the Sugar Bowl a couple of years ago when Kirby was so nervous about it, and Kirby was. You can go back and we played the audio before you, but you can go back and watch the video on the DawgNation YouTube page. Pickens was good in that press conference too. He was. All right, so good stuff. Thanks for being here, y'all. It's late. We got to go. R.S. Andrews Cool Down. Make sure you find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. You can trust R.S. Andrews to do that for you today. Heating system still cold at night. Get that thing tuned back up to factory fresh specs. And it's kind of warm today. Get you start thinking about those air conditioning units getting cool and ready to go for the springtime. Can't wait for that. R.S. Andrews got you covered on all that too. So big thanks to them. Big thanks as well to our friends at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. There are some very serious things going on in the world today. Obviously, we don't talk about that on this show, but it is important, especially when you talk about world affairs and what's happening over in Ukraine. Great coverage of that in the AJC and local reactions. How folks in the state of Georgia are responding to what's happening there over in Europe. So you can do that. State of the Union last night. You can kind of follow the breakdown on all that. And getting ready for GHSA basketball tournament time. So that's good stuff. What's going to happen for the Braves in light of the continued work stoppage in Major League Baseball. You can follow that. And some really cool things coming up in the city of Atlanta this month for fun. Always good coverage of that online at the AJC. AJC.com for a lot more on that. Big thanks to our friends at Breda Pest Management for being a part of our show today. Happy to have them bringing our show to you. Great to be in partnership with the official pest control provider of UGA, that pest management service, taking care of Sanford Stadium and all those UGA venues, taking care of us now too. What a great thrill it is to say the DawgNation Daily is presented by Breda Pest Management, and a great thrill to tell all of you that we'll see you back here again tomorrow.